Hey, yo, what's up, everybody? Today I wanted to talk about Wuthering Waves and its story. Specifically, where we are currently versus where we were before. And I feel like some of the things that have been happening in the 3.0 chapter are different and basically have moved the story forward. But I do think that the story risks continuing to fall back into some of the things that it used to do that I feel like they should move on from. And I think it's important to talk about those things too. I think it's important to talk about the things that are working well for the story and the things that aren't working well for the story. And I think ironing the story out and making it better improves the game, but it also improves people's ability to follow the story. I will be talking about the most recent acts of the story towards the end, but I think what I want the focus of this video to primarily be on is the things they can kind of do to make the story better. With that in mind, without further ado, let's get it. All right, so I feel like I got to say this too. This isn't one of those scripted videos that I do a lot of the times. This is kind of like just me going off the top. I do have a couple bullet points to help me stay on track, but yeah, man, you're getting my kind of thoughts as I form them and speak about them. So that's just another point of note. Anyway, let's keep it pushing. In this story, we haven't really progressed the framework story, considering the fact that we're encroaching upon the 2-year mark. And we know about as much about Rover now as we did at the start. I mean, you could say we picked up a few tidbits of information here and there, but even though we picked up these tidbits, it still really hasn't furthered our understanding of him and the world before him in really any meaningful way. I think moving the story is what makes it exciting. It's what makes it fun. Basically, the framework story not progressing, it's almost like you're watching Tom and Jerry, or a Saturday morning cartoon in a way. You know that no matter what happens, no matter any of the things that occur, at the end of that episode, everything is going to be exactly where it left off. Everything is going to be all back to normal. And occasionally, you might get a little bit of information. Wow, you figured out this character really likes cheese. Or you figured out that in the past, they learned how to play the piano. But you never really get anything substantial. Another thing is I feel like there are not really any meaningful character buildups. Some of these characters are just kind of tossed in the fray. They're here and they're used for this particular moment, only to never be seen or heard from again in any important kind of way. And I think that's kind of weird. Like, we're meeting all these people, but yet none of these people end up being important to the story as a whole. They're just kind of important to their localized story. And then even then, it gets further diminished because even in their localized area or region, they still don't get used all that much, only for their particular DBU patch, for real. And I think another important point is the lack of villain motivation in this game. I mean, when it comes down to what the Fraxidus is planning, because they're the primary villain, I mean, of course, there's a Lament, there's a Thenodians, but the primary villain that we interact with, the one that carries over from region to region, the one who's behind the scenes, pulling the strings of the Thenodians, are the Fraxidus. And the Fraxidus don't really give us that much information. You know, according to the beginning of the game, whatever information that they have is so potent, it's so sacred that once it's told to us, we would join them willingly. And it's like, okay, well, if it's that important, then tell us. You know, you want to convert us, right? You want to bring us over to your side. Okay, let us know. But they never tell Rover. So we don't have any idea of what their motivation is again. And again, this brings us back to Saturday morning cartoons. Why is the villain bad? Because he likes to do bad things.
Because it's fun. Fun to do bad things.
Like, it's as simple as that. And as an audience of fictional, anime, comic book, cartoon, whatever entertainment, we've grown past that point. We've grown past villains just doing bad stuff for the sake of being bad. When you think about the real world, it's not that black and white. People may do bad things, but unless they're mentally deranged, oftentimes there's something. Even then, you could say that mental derangement is their reason, but they often have some type of rhyme or reason as to why they perform the actions that they do. And currently we don't know, and nothing has been given to us after all this time. And it's okay to say, you know, we're going to tell you later, you know, you're going to find out. But if the princess is always in another castle, it kind of eventually starts to get a little bit boring, a little bit predictable, a little bit old. And I think that kind of shows a part of the limitation of wanting to do a story that just continues and continues without actually planning it out and structuring out the villainous organization, the people who connect with it, and their affiliates. I think if you properly plan these things out, you can have a long-lasting story. There are plenty of anime series who show that this is possible. Hundreds of episodes where there are tons of villains and they all somehow link together in a meaningful kind of way, and the reason for their actions is somehow meaningful even if you don't agree with it. But we're just not given anything at this point, and it gets kind of annoying. Another point that I want to mention about the story is a lack of consequence. What I mean by that is a lack of stakes when it comes to a character dying or becoming gravely injured or something like that. When we defeat a member of the Fraxidus, they just are like, okay, well, I'll see you next time, you meddling kids.
Blasted meddling kids.
The story just kind of continues on, and it's like the same as if we didn't fight him at all. We fought Hecate in chapter 2, act 3, but it was almost like we didn't fight her because there's no evidence of us having done so. We faced Scar, and it's almost no evidence. I mean, I will say for Scar, they did take him off the board for a while, and so I will credit that. But, it's like there's no permanence. It's not just for the villains. I mean, this is also an issue for characters that fall on the good side as well. And another thing that fits right in line with this particular point is the power level of the characters, both the villains and the heroes. They're too damn strong. Like, the main character is so strong that he basically can do anything, apparently. Which, okay, fine. It wouldn't be the only character like that, right? But like, you have other characters like Galbrenna. She's so strong that she literally just got stabbed in the abdomen, pulled it out, dropped it on the ground, and she wasn't limping around. She wasn't harmed or hurt. She was just like, okay. So anyway, a character like Frolova, according to her lore, she really can't really die. For real. And Cristofaro is essentially an enemy with limitless power. He stopped Cardathea's Thernodian sentinel-cleaving slash, stopped bullets, created massive Sonarosphere, has written people out of reality, created people, and even brought random things into reality. The man is ridiculously overpowered. And so with this particular scale of power, how can a character really be defeated? Or at least some of the characters? How can some of these characters actually be challenged or actually win? It kind of takes it to a place where you don't really have stakes because nothing can ever be taken to the extreme because everyone can survive the extreme. So if everyone can survive the extreme, then where is the extent of anything? There's no sacrifice. There's no pressure. It's almost like, oh, okay, well, I know that at the end of the story, everybody's always going to survive. Everything is always going to be perfect. You know what I mean? And it's not like that for comics. It's not like that for anime. And that's what this game is trying to be, right? It's trying to fit into that niche of anime or comics. And in those shows, while it may not be in everyone, but they do have significant characters that just end up not being there anymore due to their defeat. And that just never seems to happen. And I don't think that it's a bad thing for the story. A lot of people who play these games are attached to the game for the story. I do feel like it's worth addressing. And another important point that I want to talk about is the terminology. I feel like they over-introduce new terminology in the game. Now, I'm a person who spends a lot of time with the story. And I know I do recap videos and people look at the videos and they're like, oh, okay, well, I guess he just, made this or thought of this while he was, playing through the story.
Not true. Fam, not true.
But actually, I watch the story, I rewatch the story, I read the story, I go back and try to connect the dots of things that characters said and things they might have meant and things that connect back to previous eras of the story. There will be no way for me to do it to this capacity if I didn't do those things. You know what I mean? And if I were just playing the game and just playing the story, I would get understanding of what happened and the events that occurred, but the significance of those events would be lost to some degree. How these events connect to other events might necessarily not be as prominent. I think there are things they can do to make those things more noticeable. And one of those things is how they introduce words. They introduce so much terminology that it's easy for people to get lost. And I'll look at my comments sometimes and I'll notice that people seem to understand some things, but I'll also notice that they'll be saying things that just didn't happen in the story, or things that just they seem to have gotten from somewhere, but they didn't get from the story. And so it's worth it to kind of like plug people in and make sure the story is kind of easily understandable as possible. You know, you can have intelligent characters, you can have an intelligent story without introducing 50 new words of terminology every act. I mean, just in the most recent act alone, you know, we got like a ridiculous number of terms. We got Roya, Space Trek Collective, Star Torch Academy, Helios, Reactor Drive, Solaceum, Solaskin, Solace Tree, Exoswarm, Exostrider. I mean, and the list goes on, Void Worm. There's so many different new terminologies. And, you know, if you know what you're looking for, you know what you're listening to, you can understand all of it. But a lot of people fall through the cracks looking at some of the comments that I have on some of my videos. So I think it's just worth it to kind of like talk in plain terms from time to time. And I mentioned in one of my streams before too, that one of the ways they can do this is through the main character, through Rover. In movies and films, they kind of attack, you know, complicated terminology or intelligent characters and dialogue through a few different means. And one of those is just having a dumb character around, right? A dumb character is going to ask questions. They're going to say the wrong thing so someone else can correct them. But oftentimes those type of characters can become easily annoying, especially in games. So the better way to do it would be to have the main character be an everyman. And of course, they're not an everyman in regards to their power or strength, but an everyman in terms of their understanding of the world. And who better to represent that than someone who has amnesia? Rover should be the one who's asking all the questions. He should be the one saying what, why, when, how, and how much. They should be asking all these questions because they don't remember anything. And we are the player. We're being introduced to everything for the first time. We don't know. So I think it's important to kind of like treat us like a person who might not know what you're talking about at first. But instead, the game treats it like, oh yeah, this is fine. Sidebar, I feel like I just need to re-record this video because I think there are certain things that just kind of like, I don't know. I was supposed to say certain things first. I ended up saying certain things later. But anyway, in case I don't, I'm just gonna keep talking. But yeah, man, you know, I remember vividly. There's a point in Act 11 of the story. And in Act 11, we had Cardathea and Galbrina talking, and they reveal one of the hugest bombshells of the story. And it was revealed like it was just another Tuesday. They didn't put any emphasis on it. And apparently this was something that Cardathea had known for a long time, but yet just did not mention in any way. And it was unknown to us. Basically, that information was that the Threnodian that we're currently up against is an artificial Threnodian at this point in the story. And we didn't know this. And so when you get to the end of Chapter 2, Act 11, you hear the Fractionist talking about an artificial Threnodian. And when I first heard that, I was like, wait, what? When did this happen? You know, and it wasn't until I went back and reviewed the story that I actually heard it and what was going on. But I know that had to go over a lot of people's heads because of how it was introduced. It was introduced like it wasn't a big deal. It was introduced between Galbrina and Cardathea on a static background with just some particle effects floating around. And they're just standing there. Just two PNGs just talking back and forth. There's no dramatic music. There's no interesting camera angles. There's no expressions on the characters' faces to reveal some type of surprise or some type of bombshell. Imagine this. This is a different scenario, but I'm just trying to get you to understand why this is significant if you want to talk about revealing some significant part of the story. Imagine you have a character. They're on screen and they run by, they drop a pencil. It falls out of their pocket. The camera zooms in on the pencil as it hits the ground and it rolls to the side. The camera follows it. And as it's rolling away, you see the character who had the pencil drop running off in the distance. What you gather is this drop of the pencil is significant. It's important. It requires your attention. It's something that you need to remember. It's information you need to hold in your head for the story as it progresses. Wuthering Waves doesn't do that. They just tell you information as if it's nothing and just not put enough emphasis on anything. And so as a result, you get all this information, but none of this information seems to be weighted. It's all weighted the same. There's no gravitas to any bit of information, and with no gravity to any bit of information, everything seems meaningless, or everything is meaningful, but we know that everything isn't meaningful. So unless you're following the story and you're kind of putting two and two together and you're going back through it and trying to talk about what's significant here, and then you're bringing it back to what's happening in the future, and you're kind of doing stuff like that. And that's what I like to do in my videos, or at least that's what I try to do in my videos. Unless you're doing stuff like that, you're going to miss stuff because they didn't design it in a way and write it in a way and portray it in a way that allowed you to follow the clues that you needed to process the story. I think it's important to talk about the woes of the story. Of course, there are good points, and I think I need to mention this at the start of my video. If I were to start this video again, I think it's important to mention those things. But we're already deep in this shit now, so we're gonna keep going. Sometimes, I remember watching Sevi give her take on the video, and Sevi said, I feel like I don't understand what happened. And she was at the end of chapter 2, act 3. And I totally agree with her. I totally understand it. She's like, I understood the things that happened. If you were to ask her what occurred, she could tell you exactly what occurred. But the significance of what occurred is lost. And it felt like we weren't pointed towards any direction in particular. And I think that is part of the issue, where the gravity of every event is all weighted the same. And I feel like the hows, the whats, the whys, and the whens are just often skipped. When it comes down to the gameplay, I think that the gameplay is enjoyable whenever we have it. The problem is throughout the story, there's not really any gameplay, and we got gameplay early on in some of the early stories. I mean, if you think about Chung Li's story quest, you think about Jin Shi's story quest or main quest for Act 7. When you think about different parts of the story, you had puzzles, you had boss fights that popped up, mini boss fights, you had enemies that popped up. I feel like oftentimes, the game, they just kind of forget that we've been building up our weapons, we've been building up our characters, we've been selecting the characters that we think are going to be most compatible with each other. Even if you give us characters to play with, with their stats already set. That's kind of why we play the game. We play the game to use the characters, to use their special moves, to solve puzzles, to find treasure. And when you just are like, here's some story, here's some story, here's some story, here's some story, here's some cutscenes. And of course, I do appreciate the cutscenes. They do break up the story and make it much more engaging. But also, we also want to play the game. I can't be the only one that feels like I'd like more gameplay in the game. And I know some people, because I've seen some of the comments, I've seen the comments of people who critique the story and how they're responded to. And a lot of times people respond to it like, well, you're not supposed to grasp everything at one time. You're not supposed to understand all the different details of the entire story from the beginning, from the jump. And that's totally understandable. No one is saying that. And I think pretty much everyone who's playing this game has watched a TV show, has watched an anime show, has watched, some type of series in their life. This is not their first go at sequential episodic, entertainment. But the way they reveal it makes it difficult to follow along. And if I wasn't going through the story, the way I do, I'd still be able to follow along, but there would definitely be a lot of things that I was supposed to know going into different parts of the story that I would probably miss. And I think that addressing some of these things I mentioned before, how they progress the framework story, the meaningfulness of these character buildups, the lack of villain motivation, the lack of depth, the lack of consequence, all these different things, the lack of gravity towards any particular moment in the story, all of that adds up over time. And I feel like it just makes the story not as good as it could be. And I think it's important to talk about these types of things. I think it's important to mention that, hey, the story would be so much better if they did this or they did that or they changed this, because at the end of the day, good developers want to create an end product that the customers or the players enjoy. And if, as long as it doesn't get in the way of them being able to be successful, them being able to express their creativity and them being able to earn a living, I don't see why they couldn't implement some of these things to make the story that much better. But hey man, let me know if y'all think I'm tripping down in the comments, but I feel like I'm pretty spot on with this. Sorry I didn't give examples for every individual thing. I mean, there's tons of things. This is off the top. Okay, with all of this being said, Chapter 3, Acts 1 and 2. And for those two acts, I thought they were pretty well executed. I mean, there are some things that I feel like could have been better. You know what I mean? They could have focused on Chisa a little bit more, since that was kind of part of our reason for even finding out about this portion of our past and kind of what brought us there in the first place. But a lot of people have talked about that already. I want to talk about some other things that I feel like they were doing well. And one of those things is, while we haven't really gotten much about Rover's past in terms of like substantial information of like why he made this decision and why he made that decision and how he connected with this person or that person, we really haven't really gotten a lot of that. But the fact that the frequency of those kind of gems of information about the past are getting more and more plentiful, or at least so it seems, it's giving me more hope that some large revelation is coming soon. But one of the things in Act 1 that had me a little bit nervous was the fact that when we got to the Space Trek Collective and we met Mornier there, Mornier started using a bunch of complicated jargon to explain like what was going on. And Rover was like, "Hi, they what?" He was confused, taken aback, like he should have been. But Mornier tried to explain, and she still didn't really explain anything.
A surface detector built by the Space Trek Collective for the reactor drive's inspection and maintenance. It's vital for the ceremony's data calibration. And now, at the worst possible time.
And I was like, are we gonna have more of this going forward? Because like, I understood what was happening, right? But like, I did not really understand the details of it. Like, I knew Hivatia was supposed to be on our side, but like, why do we have to fight it? What's going on here? What are the stakes here? If we don't do this, is the building gonna go into lockdown? Is it gonna crumble? Is it gonna self-destruct? Like, what exactly, what's going on? You know what I mean? The intricacies of what's going on. You know what I mean? I feel like if they just kind of communicated that, rather than using a bunch of and I get that's part of Mornier's character and personality, but yeah, I don't know, maybe they could have had a random other person step in and say, what she's saying is, you know. But I like the cutscenes. Some people didn't like the introduction with Lene and how much time we spent with her riding the bike and all that. I thought that was pretty cool, man. She's like just a new person showing you around the school, and I actually liked that. It was really cool. As far as the latest quest, right? Act 2, I thought that was kind of interesting. I do think that they kind of stepped into the line of what they kind of typically do with dating each character. You know, for those of you who don't feel like it's a date, I don't know, man. I feel like you guys just might embody that meme of guy finds out girl was flirting 10 years late. I don't know. So we kind of fell into that a little bit, but you know, it really wasn't too much. And yeah, man, I thought it was cool. I was very curious and very interested about all the people who are guarding Sol Asylum, especially the Shaper. And it brought questions to mind like, wait a minute, why did the Shaper need Rover's permission? Who really is he? Usually, up until now, the people who's needed Rover's permission to take some action were the Sentinels. And so it had me questioning like, wait, who is this guy? Is he a Sentinel, or he's a representation of a Sentinel? Is he the Sentinel's resonator? I mean, they don't have a Sentinel in this region, so is he like the stand-in for that? Like, what really is going on here? So it left a lot of questions. Hopefully we'll get answers to those things soon, and hopefully these answers kind of bring us back, and hopefully they kind of lead to some type of revelation of us actually understanding a bit more. But yeah, man, overall, I thought it was cool. I don't think it was earth-shattering or anything like that. However, I do think they're kind of slowly dripping things to us so they can build up until 3.1, because if you've seen the trailer for the character Amith, you kind of get the vibe that it's going to be kind of a story of epic proportions. As far as how they're going to build up to that epicness, you know, that's yet to be seen. And that's another thing that could be critiqued, is that there wasn't really a lot of information from the end of one act leading to another. And so you don't get that, man, I can't wait to see what happens in the next act, because each act feels like it's completed and finished. And I think there's something to say for that. I do like the idea that every act feels like it's a story completed by itself, but I also feel like it should also lead you into the next portion. And I don't feel like there's a lot of that. But anyway, man, those are my thoughts on Lene, Mornier, and 3.x. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, man. And that is all I have for you guys today. Until next time, I'll catch you in the waves. Also, by the way, I have a Discord. A lot of us talk about lore and things like that and just share information and just what we enjoy about the game. If you want to connect with me there, yeah, I'll leave a link in the description. Anyways, like I was saying, that's all, folks. Catch you on the next one. Peace.